Clyde Mallinson is an independent energy expert. He joins us now on Zoom to share his opinion about the ongoing power outages and the impact industrial action by Eskom employees might have had on supply of energy. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us. Before we get to the industrial action aspect, because there's a difference of opinion of how much workers are to blame for this, let's just start with what we're seeing now in terms of the power outages. It's quite confusing, I must say, as a consumer. You move from stage 2 to 4 to 6, and somehow you get caught in between. You never really know how much power is going to be needed to be taken from you. How should we regard what the implementation is at the moment?
Evening, Sapiso. Thanks for having me on your show. Well, the interesting thing is I think stage 4 and stage 6 look the same on the Eskom's push load shedding notification. But if you look carefully, some of the periods are now 4.5 hours instead of 2.5 hours. And I think that might catch some people out. We've come to sort of accept 2.5 hour load shedding. And then when it's suddenly 4.5 hours again, it seems a bit excessive. And so that seems to be what's happened. But in connection with the mining companies, they don't actually get shed in the way we do. They don't get switched off. They have to curtail. So throughout a period of load shedding, the mining companies and the big energy users have to curtail. And I think in a previous clip, you heard the person saying they curtail 5%, 10%, 15%. And they can kind of manage up to stage 4, although they would prefer stage 2 for obvious reasons. When it gets to stage 6, there's suddenly certain things that you can't curtail any further. You can't stop ventilation underground if you're going to send workers underground. So stage 6 really starts threatening not just a loss of production in the mining industry, but it threatens actually closing down some of the shafts of mines that have multiple shafts. So they would then say, okay, we're using 800 megawatts or something across all our mining operations. We can't cut all of them by 30% or 20%. So what we'll do is we'll actually shut a couple of them down completely for a while to effect the curtailment across the whole company. And of course, that's massively debilitating. So I think the mining companies are very, very concerned about high levels of continuous load shedding as opposed to the kind of peak evening load shedding that we had sort of become accustomed to.
And I think for quite a few consumers, and I've been listening to conversations, reading on social media, etc., what people are concerned about is it feels almost as if it's a lot more frequent than before. So even if, as you say, we're experiencing longer periods of load shedding, it feels as if you go to bed to load shedding, you wake up to 2 or 3 hours of power, and then you're on to load shedding, it's back again, and then it's off again. So is it more frequent, or does it only feel that way? And also, as much as Eskom is saying it needs to put a certain amount of megawatt back onto the grid for us to be able to keep the lights on, the question is, how long can it sustain this? Because the impact on productivity in general, across the board, across all sectors, is rather large.
Yeah, look, it does increase in frequency. So stage 1, stage 2 will be less frequent than when we jump to stage 3 or 4. So we tend to have maybe 1 load shedding event a day at stage 2, and every second day maybe 2 load shedding events. Then if we jump to, we seem to miss the odd load shedding, if you know what I mean. It's normally 2 or 4 or 6. I'm not sure what's wrong with 1, 3, and 5, but I suppose that would be odd load shedding. So we tend to have even load shedding. And when we move from 2 to 4, for example, we pretty much move into 3 events per day on a regular basis. There might be every third day we might only have 2 occasions of load shedding. And then, as I say, when we move to stage 6, we definitely have 3 each day. And at least 1 of those 3 is a 4-hour or 4.5 hour duration. So yes, the frequency will definitely have increased as we move from stage 2 to stage 6.
So now
So it's not a
let's talk.
perception, it's a reality.
Okay, let's talk about Eskom employees embarking on industrial action a few days ago. We had the Public Enterprises Minister saying that it's impacted on the supply of energy. Workers, of course, denying this, and Eskom in turn saying that the daily running of systems at power stations was impacted because even those who wanted to go to work were prevented from doing so because of intimidation. Can you just share with us, a practical example of how industrial action does impact on rolling out of energy?
Yeah, well, I think a good way to look at this is clearly there's an impact, but I don't think there's a major impact on what I would call deep maintenance. In other words, maintenance programs that were taking place and that required a unit to be offline. Obviously, work would have slowed on that, but what we need to realize is that while plant in Eskom is running, think of it like a hospital. The staff are doing maintenance while the hospital is functioning. So these clean up of spilt ash on conveyor belts, and if you're not moving around the plant actually addressing build up of spillage, various things, you'll find that you start running into trouble. So you almost need to have let's call it a cleanup crew moving around, addressing things on an ongoing basis while the plant is actually running. And it's that maintenance that is slipping at the moment. Think of it like the nurses in the hospital have to go and change the bed linen and wash the patients and that while the patients are in hospital. And so not having crew starts having an effect of having a build-up of stuff that needs to be done. And then you have no choice but to take a unit down and use the fewer staff that might be available to actually clean up the thing and then get the thing running again, as opposed to being in a position to clean up as you go. But as regards to supply, energy supply, all of the coal-fired stations should have quite large reserve stockpiles. We quite often hear them talking about a 20 or a 30-day coal stockpile. So I don't think a week of striking should have impacted on their ability to have enough coal. They may well have depleted the coal stockpile, but my sense is the coal stockpiles are probably all very healthy at the moment because the coal fleet is performing so poorly. It's not burning as much coal as it normally would. So there's almost like a glut of coal, if you could put it in that sense. When you're not producing energy, you're not burning coal.
Now, I think it was 2 days ago that CEO Andre de Ruyter said that they're looking at taking action against those who embarked on illegal strike action. And of course, workers contend that industrial action is their right. Now, Andre de Ruyter was saying 2 days ago that 90% of workers at 3 power stations had not returned to work. And I'd like to find out, this is in relation to how many power stations across the grid, because I'm also trying to understand the impacts. And you did a very good job of putting it in layman's terms for us to understand, the value chain and how it impacts on us. But if 90% of workers at 3 power stations are not at work, would it have a significant impact on the grid and its functioning and also infrastructure? If there's been no acts of vandalism, can we assume that the infrastructure doesn't suffer if there is strike action?
Yeah, look, if these it obviously depends on which power stations. If 90% of the workers didn't pitch up at a power station that wasn't running at the time, it would have no impact. So there could be some power stations that are not functioning at the moment because they're either broken or they're offline. Then it would have no impact. Of course, if you've got 90% of your workers not pitching up at a power station where you're expecting all 6 of your units, if it's a 6-unit power station, to be running, you may actually have to shut down 3 or 4 of those units and use the staff that are there to monitor the other two. But you need to understand, when a power station is running smoothly, it doesn't need a lot of people to be tending to it every second. But as I did mention, there's background work that needs to be carrying on. There would be the ongoing maintenance, these various stuff that needs to be done to make sure that it keeps running smoothly. So the duration of a strike, we'll start seeing more power stations in trouble or being able to maintain their output as the strike lasts for longer.
What is the outlook of the frequency of strike action in the sectors? There was a study particularly looking at various sectors, and the mining sector said the frequency has decreased substantially since the beginning of 2000. What is the picture for the energy sector? And just given the key causes of labor unrest, I mean, there's been mainly health hazards in the workplace, excessive working hours, low wages, demand for leave with pay and adequate working tools, aggressive behavior of managers, etc., etc. What is the likelihood that this will cease in the energy sector? I mean, given that there is so much strife.
Yeah, look, in the energy sector, there's a massive transition that we're going through. And one thing that many people aren't necessarily aware of is that many of the unions were some of the first people to call for climate mitigation and to support the notion of us transitioning into a future where we use primarily renewable energies. It was the unions themselves that put out position papers on climate change. The problem has been that the unions feel excluded from participating in the building and the ownership and the running of that new fleet. So there's a perception that, well, perhaps not even a perception, but a perception that the new fleet will all be privately owned, and in some way that'll threaten the jobs of the unionists. So the unions have kind of dug in their heels and almost equated the sector to losing jobs in coal without looking properly at the fact that they would gain jobs in other sectors. And the thing I keep telling when I meet with some union officials, and particularly with communities, is that we actually need to increase our electricity output threefold from what it currently is. And that's in order for us to transition all of the sectors that use energy to electricity in the future. So I'm thinking about electric vehicles, electric industrial heating and cooling, and electricity as we know it. And so there's room in the future for the equivalent, if you like, of 3 Eskoms. And so there's a huge number of jobs that are available if we move in that direction. But it's perhaps understandable that incumbents cling to the known and are scared to move into the future. And it's very, very important that we educate communities, workers, unions in the potential of what that future is going to look like, and also paint a very clear picture of what that future will look like and what their role will be in that future. And in my book, the union should be leading us to that future, not holding us back from that future. And there's a fantastic role that unions can play. And of course, with all the strife in that, you lose morale of your staff. And if you're going through any difficult period like we are currently in the country with a lack of generation supply, if you lose your staff morale, gee, the battle's almost lost then. So we really, really need to find something to aim towards for the future. And I believe we should be aiming for a democratization of the ownership of the new fleet that will be built, kicking and screaming by the unions notwithstanding. We will transition to renewable energies and storage. And the only question is, will the unions be playing a leading role in that transition, or will they be acting like so-called Luddites and keeping us from moving into the future?
Clyde Mallinson, thank you very much. Much appreciated your time and your insights. Independent energy analyst Clyde Mallinson, just giving us a bird's eye view of the energy sector, some of the challenges it's been facing lately and how that's impacted on security of supply and, of course, labor relations issues as well.